Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I have the great privilege of writing our newsletter articles, and so this will be focusing on that. The newsletter articles of 2025 were all about Allen County's titans of industry, people who made Lima prosper through their hard work in multiple businesses or careers. The following people will be covered in today's talk. John W. Van Dyke, Easter Straker, and Senator Calvin Brice. There were also articles written about Henry H. Dizell, Dr. Samuel A. Baxter, Benjamin C. Thoroat, Jack Inouye, and James E. Grosjean, whose second article is actually not coming out until December 10th. The whole series of Titans of Industry in Allen County was done to highlight the great minds and industries that were born here and made this county what it is today. Likewise, these three examples will demonstrate our history of industry and innovation. J.W. Van Dyke was the first site manager of the Lima refinery, bringing it from a few wells to a fully functioning refinery that he ran for 16 years. Van Dyke also held several patents, built the first modern gas station, and was known to be someone with a great head on his shoulders for business. He also lived in the McDonald House from 1897 to 1904, and that is the Victorian mansion next door that we get to share with the public. So, John Wesley Van Dyke was born in Mercerburg, Pennsylvania in December 27, 1849. His grandfather had started a prosperous farm, which his father then turned into a drover business, an even more prosperous drover business, which was herding animals for their owners. His father would serve in the Civil War and unfortunately passed away at that time, leaving Van Dyke, his only son, with $22,000 to be collected on his 21st birthday. And to make that in today's money, that's about $73,000. So he had a pretty great inheritance coming to him when he was 21. He was sent to school in hopes of becoming a lawyer like his paternal uncle. And so he studied at a private school in Pennsylvania until 1865. His grandfather and mother were really the two people that wanted him to become a lawyer. He did not. So in 1867, he actually ran away from home. He would run away to Venango County, Pennsylvania, where oil was being drilled at that time. He first worked as a clerk in the area before starting on the oil fields of former Virginia Governor H.A. Wise. He was first a pumper, then a tool dresser, and then finally a driller in that area. And as he learned the business, he became known as a level-headed young man who really understood the oil industry. He tried to talk Wise into buying a tract of land that was for sale that he thought would be a good oil property for a field. Wise ended up not buying it, and this was before Van Dyke was 21, so he didn't have that money yet. So he actually got money from his mother, would buy the tract of land, and turn a huge profit through that. And that was really when he became better known in the industry. I would tell his story as both the mixture of somebody who really understood the oil business, but also somebody who was often in the right place at the right time. And this is no more true than when he became friends with John Hill. I think they met just at a saloon in the area and hit it off. They're both oil businessmen. And soon after they became friends, John Hill was joined Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company and brought Van Dyke with him. With his level-headed business sense, Van Dyke was promoted not long afterwards to be the manager of the Standard's Brooklyn refinery. This is when he became close friends and business associates with John D. Rockefeller, which is eventually what brought Van Dyke to Allen County. Benjamin Thoroat had hit oil in Lima during 1885, but it was a different type of oil. It had significant sulfur compounds, and at that era, a lot of oil that was being manufactured was for oil lamps, so illuminating oil. And of course, nobody wants to burn an oil lamp that smells like rotten eggs. So when Standard wanted to set up the refinery in Lima, they found they needed to find a way to desulfurize the oil. So Van Dyke was sent to Lima with to figure out that process with German and Canadian chemist Herman Fresh in 1886. Fresh had been working on a way to desulfurize oil already, and it was really Van Dyke's job to make that Fresh's plans into a commercially viable option. So Fresh figured out how to separate the compounds, and Van Dyke helped him out with that by creating a hollow water-cooled drive shaft to be put into the furnaces to recover copper oxide, which was one of the compounds needed to remove sulfur from oil. So this allowed the refinery to be fully functioning by 1887. So they only really worked on that for a year. And the refinery was had the most modern machinery of the time, was built on 276 acres, was on the routes of 3 different rail lines, and employed around 600 people, which is a huge part of the population at that time. Back when he was at the Brooklyn refinery, Van Dyke was known to be somebody that not only manufactured those illuminating oils, but also manufactured the byproducts of that process, which were at that time mostly paraffin wax and mechanical oils. So he did the same thing at the Lima refinery, making it even more profitable. Van Dyke would be the manager of the Lima refinery until 1903, so 16 years, when he was transferred then to Point Breeze, New Jersey, to be closer to Standard's main office, because he'd been on the board of Standard the year before, and it was just too much of a commute from Lima. So now we're going to talk about his oil inventions and just some of the patents he had. So with Fresh, Van Dyke patented a way to inject oil wells with under pressure hydrochloric acid and glycerin to increase well outputs. It was a game changer in the oil industry. Basically what it did was it would blow up more of the area so you could get more oil from just one single derrick. So you didn't need them quite as close together. So that obviously saves a lot of money. And it is thought to have improved the industry, especially in Ohio and Indiana, incalculably. With his later associate, Allen County's own William Irish, Van Dyke patented a tower still that I'm going to quote the description because I don't think I could explain it quite as well. So, quote, "It offered greater control over condensation during refinery. This technique was considered the industry's first complete distillation process, saving millions of dollars annually in refining costs," end quote. So basically it gave you the purest form of each of the outputs, not only those byproducts, but also the illuminating oil. It was also one of his inventions by himself that really changed the industry was creating a new oil tank car. At that time, there was a lot of safety issues with shipping oil across the country on rail lines. A lot of times, if they were hit, that train was hit in any way, it would cause an explosion. So he built a car that basically would rock in a way so that wouldn't happen, and it almost eliminated explosions if hit. And thousands of cars were made during the 1890s before someone else iterated off of that and made even a better version. And lastly, he also patented a pipe end protector. Basically, he would weld metal caps on the ends of the pipes, and then when they were ready to be laid in an oil pipeline, they would just have to hit those off and connect them to one another. And so it kept those pipes free of any materials and ready to be joined. So until the federal courts dismantled Standard Oil's monopoly in 1911, he worked with them. But he was then installed as the president of one of their baby companies that came out of the monopoly, and that was the Atlantic Refining Company, which I'm going to read how dire the strait it was in. They had 4 refining properties, domestic marketing in Delaware and Pennsylvania, but no oil production, no pipelines, no tankers. 60% of their business was foreign, yet they had no foreign sales force. No capital, $9 million in debt, and all of the major stockholders were also major stockholders of Standard's baby companies. So it was a bit of a disaster, to say the least. But like always, Van Dyke's level-headedness and innovations got Atlantic through his first few years. And then during World War I, they actually started making quite a profit because they became the primary provider for the U.S. Air Force's aviation-grade gasoline. And they were making money hand over fist doing that. So by the end of the 1910s, Van Dyke had made Atlantic a profitable company again. And it was during that time that he would build the first modern gas station in Pittsburgh through Atlantic. And so this was the first time you would really drive up to a station that just had gas. Somebody would pump your gas for you because that was the era of that still. But before that, you would have had to go to a mechanic to get gas. And it wouldn't be an easy process like how we pump gas today. So that was the first iteration of that. Likewise, during the roaring 1920s, Van Dyke had a little bit of a thought of, this is booming too fast. I'm a little scared of what that means for the industry, what that's going to entail. Let's not keep building. Let's just stay firm here. And of course, we know that the Great Depression came after that. And he had apparently a little insight into worries about that. So he had Atlantic make it through the Great Depression without cutting any employees or their wages. They just cut hours, basically. That was the only thing they cut. And even continued to pay dividends to their shareholders. So that is really what he's known for most in the Atlantic Refining Company, which is now part of BP. Van Dyke would often travel around the United States as well as to different countries to set up oil fields. And after one of those travels to Brazil in 1938, he would become ill, which would progressively become worse until he passed away in Philadelphia on September 13th, 1993. He had set up an endowment for children of Atlantic workers for $1.5 million, not to be touched for 50 years. So people today actually are still receiving scholarships from that. It's just children whose parents worked for the BP are eligible to sign up for it. We know him here at the Allen County Museum not only for living in the McDonald House, but he also donated a lot of the pieces in our collection. If you walk around the museum after this, you'll probably see him on a few of the object displays saying this was donated by John Van Dyke, especially like any of the artworks or sculptures. And to talk about the other industrial connections that he had, he was a director of the Cambria and Indiana Railroad, the American Shipbuilders and Shipowners Incorporation, Monroe Coal Co., American Petroleum Institute, the First Trust Co. of Philadelphia, the First National Bank of Philadelphia, and the Societe del Mail. So he was directors of all of those things as well. Van Dyke is a man of very few comparisons in the world of oil and had connections to many more industries as well. Easter Straker, quote, the First Lady of the Air, remembered as well for her community involvement and energetic support of charitable projects, quote. That was from Easter Straker's obituary. Straker was in 1940, Straker would start her radio career at WSOI in Decatur, Illinois. She would start her alternate program there, Easter's Parade, at WSOI. The program was revolutionary for its time because it was a general talk show that didn't focus on so-called women's topics. Straker would talk about everything from pop culture, the arts, current affairs, medicine, really anything and everything. In 1944, 4 years later, she would move to Chicago and be on the Chicago radio station, The Wind. Straker was the first female program director at The Wind, not to mention the first female program director in all of Chicago. She pioneered a pre-recorded show there called Celebrity Spotlight, where she would go on location around Chicago with a wire recorder, which was a very new invention at the time, and would pre-record these interviews with celebrities. It became a hugely popular show, and she began to schedule those type of interviews with celebrities in their hotel room, at a train station, backstage, pretty much anywhere that they both could meet. She would stay with The Wind until 1948. In 1948, Straker moved back to her birthplace and became a program manager at a new station called WIMA. She immediately started Easter's Parade up again at WIMA It was a 2-hour-long show that began at 10 a.m. and still covered the same amount of broad topics she had been known for. Because of her general acclaim, Stryker's programs soon became sponsored by local companies, especially Gray's and Pangol's. By the time Stryker's radio career ended, Easter's Parade became the longest continuously sponsored program in broadcast history. She was on the radio for the majority of her career, and in the 1880s she would change stations to WSLR and WCIT, who are still based in Lima today. She would do the same type of interviews with celebrities or locals talking about anything and everything from medicine to pop culture. On April 18th, 1953, WIMA-TV, now WLIO, had its first program, and Stryker was a part of it from the very beginning. Only 2 years later, in 1955, Easter's Parade would come to the screen. It was an unmissable afternoon program with a mix of interviews, special guests, and broad general interest topics that Stryker was known for. The most memorable part of Easter's Parade on TV was definitely the birthday chair, which we had on display over there. Children would sit on the birthday throne while being interviewed by Stryker, and afterwards they would get to take a handful of pennies out of the jar. During the show's almost 30-year run, it is estimated that more than 41,600 children sat in the birthday chair. In 1963, Stryker would become the Director of Community Service for WIMA-TV and radio, which we'll be talking about next. All the good things she did while part of that role. One of Stryker's most remarkable interviews of her entire career took place in 1958 when she interviewed former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Stryker was known for only endorsing products or services that she used herself. Stryker did a testimonial type commercial during her show throughout her entire career, even when it became less popular of a type of commercial, and would talk about her experiences with a product. Because of this, she was often connected to the best and sometimes most enduring businesses in the area, bringing prestige to not only Stryker, but said businesses. Stryker's Easter Parade would be on WIMA-TV until 1986, and on the television of most households in the area for just under 30 years. I think anyone from Allen County who's been alive long enough will be able to tell you that Stryker was an incredibly generous and philanthropic person. It is mentioned in nearly all of the literature that I got to read about her while researching. There was much breadth and depth to what she spent her time and money supporting, but here are a few of the examples of some of the most important things she did. For the Allen County Polio Fund, Stryker raised 1 million pennies, or around $10,000. She believed that doing a penny drive was the best way to raise funds because everyone could donate, from the smallest child to the poorest person. She was known especially for spearheading the Teddy Bear Fund, a charity that is still alive today and gives teddy bears to every sick child in Allen County hospitals for their care and comfort. She helped the Lima Symphony Orchestra, Lima Seroptimus Club, and the Lima Public Library through her leadership on their boards and many donations. At the end of her life, Stryker tried to create a scholarship for ONU broadcasting students, and the only reason it didn't work out is because she unfortunately passed a little bit faster than she had planned. The photo here shows her helping give children the oral Sabin polio vaccine. Polio was one of the things that she focused a lot on trying to eradicate in Allen County. Stryker was a woman who spent her time making Allen County a better place for everyone in the community. Throughout her career, Stryker also gave talks widely in Ohio and Indiana for clubs and gatherings, and even led a tour around the world for some Allen County citizens in 1963. In 1985, Stryker was diagnosed with colon cancer. She would move the next year to broadcasting only on the radio. The last show of her career was on WCIT on September 4th, 1991. There was a tribute dinner held at the end of 1991 for Stryker. Really, it was the community showing up and appreciating Stryker for her monumental and impactful career and life. Stryker passed away April 18th, 1992. She had a 51-year-long career, with 42 of those years spent broadcasting out of Lima. Easter Straker was buried in Memorial Memorial Park Cemetery and will always be remembered by her community for her groundbreaking broadcast career and philanthropic disposition. Brice might be one of the most cunning and intriguing people I've had the pleasure of researching. If anyone has followed along with the newsletter articles this year, you will know that I had to break him up into 2 different articles because of the enormity of everything he did throughout his career and life. Today we're mostly just going to focus on his railroad and political careers, but I'll do a short list at the end of the things he was involved with otherwise, and I do suggest going on our website and reading the second article if you're interested in learning more. Calvin Stewart Brice was born September 17, 1845, to William and Elizabeth Brice in Morrow County, Ohio. William was a Presbyterian minister and focused a lot on Brice's education. It was a big priority to their family. So at only the age of 13 in 1859, Brice was sent to a college preparation course at Miami University. Then in 1860, just a year later, he was 14, he was in the freshman class at the university. The next year, he tried to join the Civil War with fellow Miami students, but they sent him back because he was only 15 years of age. So then the next year, in 1862, he re-enlisted and was actually accepted because of his age at 16 to the 86 OVI, and he did a 3-month term of service in West Virginia, guarding Union railroads. After that 3-month term, he went back to Miami University and graduated in June of 1863. And he would go on to teach 1 term at the Lima Public School System, and then for a short time be a clerk at the Allen County Auditors of the E Company of the 18th OVI in the Civil War. He spent the rest of his service till the end of the Civil War guarding and repairing railroad lines in Tennessee and North Carolina. Brice got appointed to lieutenant colonel for his service, but was not mastered into the U.S. Army. So after that, he decided to go to law school the fall of 1865, so not long after the Civil War ended, and he went to law school at the University of Michigan. He started a law firm after graduating with James Irving, one of his friends, in 1868, called Irving and Brice Firm, and they would be out of one of the northwestern blocks of Public Square, is where their office was. Being a small-town lawyer was not very profitable, and Brice has always been pretty ambitious, so he looked for other options. He had followed this new law that allowed businesses to basically crowdfund in a really dubious way. And I'm going to be honest, I don't understand a lot about law or business, and also every time somebody wrote about this law, they kept it very vague because it became illegal once more. I think it was only 5 years later. So I still don't understand how it worked, but it was basically crowdfunding in a way you're not allowed to do now. So while it was still legal, Brice was able to explain the law to Charles Foster, who was the owner of the L.E.W. line, a line which had been failing financially and was trying to build near Lima at the time. So Foster put Brice in charge of the money making, and they were able to make enough money to finish the line through Brice's persuasiveness. Foster said later that Brice was the only reason L.E.W. was built, and because of that persuasiveness, which got people invested into the line. After this success, Brice was given stock in L.E.W. and was hired onto their legal department. L.E.W. would merge then with the Cini Syndicate because Charles Foster got out of the railroad game, and the Cini Syndicate was one of the most powerful railroad companies of the time. It was a business group basically, and they were related, kind of like the Vanderbilts. Brice made friends with the Cini Syndicate and came up with another idea, undermining their rival, William Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt had a line that went along the North Ridge in Ohio, by Lake Erie, and it was called the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad. But in Brice's opinion, he wasn't using it to its fullest. So he pitched a competing line to the Cini Syndicate, the New York City and St. Louis line that would run basically along the same pathway. In the building of this line, they lost a lot of money. So the only way to get out of the red was to have Vanderbilt buy it. so he didn't have a competing line. But Brice had a plan for this as well. He set up his wealthy friend Jay Gould to act as a prospective buyer when Vanderbilt came to barter. And it worked out. Vanderbilt bought the line for $1.5 million, a 75% profit to the CD syndicate. And this is really what turned Brice into a railroad tycoon and made himself a name in the business. Oh, and what was the New York City and St. Louis line later called? The Nickel Plate Road, one of the most impactful roads in Allen County history. Brice was well known in the industry for taking over dying railroad property lines and making them fiscally stable once more. Reconstructing said properties and lines often made him the director or president of the lines. So he was involved with around 22 railroad companies from the American South, Northeast, and Midwest. And as that number grew during the early 1890s, Brice had another ingenious idea. Connect all the railroads and make a conglomerate. His grand goal was to collect harbors all along the Great Lakes to the Atlantic seaboard. Unfortunately for his great plans, many of his railroad companies were often embroiled in legal cases, making them unable to join the conglomerate that he envisioned. Though by 1898, Brice found a way to connect up Chicago to the Atlantic seaboard through his lines. Unfortunately, at the same time, he made a very risky investment overseas. So Brice had planned a few rail lines for other countries around the world. His most successful one was in Jamaica for the British government. So he wasn't very surprised when a Chinese businessman, Ling Hung Chang, wanted Brice to build a significant line in China. From today's cities of Wuhan and Guangzhou, or at that time Hankou and Canton. He had all of his business partners involved, even talking John D. Rockefeller and some of the Vanderbilts into investing. With this group, Brice formed the China American Development Company, which was going to start surveying in 1898. Only a week later, their plans were disrupted by the Spanish-American War, which paused the work for around 7 months. China had just become open to the Western world at that time, and were very scared of being treated like a colony, for good reason, of course. So the government of China was no longer interested in working with the company anymore 7 months later, after the Spanish-American War ramped up. So the railroad line tanked, and a lot of Brice's fortune had been tied up in that prospect radio. But we'll circle back to that after talking about his political career. So being a politician and a railroad spectator / millionaire was not uncommon at the time. His friend from LE&W times, Charles Foster, had the same trajectory, and when he sold off LE&W, actually became the governor of Ohio for a few years. Brice seems to have started in the political career around 1876 when he campaigned with Samuel J. Tilden, who lost the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes. Then he campaigned again with President Grover Cleveland, who of course actually won. Brice was often the Ohio delegate to national conventions of the DNC, and in 1888 became a delegate on the DNC's campaign committee, and was known for being just as persuasive in politics as he had been in business. Then in 1889, he became the chairman of the DNC when the former chairman passed away. He would run for Senate that same year and win the election to start his term in March of 1891. So you would run basically for a term to start 2 years after you had won, which is very interesting to me. So Brice held many positions in the Senate. He was on the Democratic Steering Committee, committees on appropriations, pensions, and public buildings and grounds, and he was also the chairman on the Committee of Pacific Railroads. The problem soon became that Brice was not on the popular side of the DNC. Grover Cleveland had run on a no-tariff platform, as did most of the DNC at the time, but Brice and a few of his friends ran on a pro-tariff platform, probably because of their business interests. Brice and his colleagues were not liked by most of the DNC or popular media, as you can see in this political cartoon. Basically, it shows Grover Cleveland carving out liberty, but Brice and his friends are trying to destroy the sculpture. And that's this political cartoon. There were many, many like it during that time. So basically his stance as being pro-tariff tanked his career, and he lost his bid for re-election to Joseph B. Bergstedt in 1897, and that was the end of his political career. As you've probably noticed, Brice's political career ended around the same time as the Chinese railroad mishap happened, which was near the end of Brice's life. He would pass away on December 15th, 1898 in New York City. He was buried here at Woodlawn Cemetery, but because of his Chinese railroad scheme, he died without being a millionaire in that day's standards. He left his family no property and around $600,000, which is obviously a pretty penny, being around $23 million in today's money, but what made him be not considered a millionaire at that time. I called it in the article the railroad gamble. And honestly, it was a crazy gamble. We can see that from his life. He made so much money through nickel plate and a lot of his other roads that he took from family, but lost so much in the Chinese railroad. And actually, a few of the other people talked about during titans of industry lost tons of money in the railroad gamble of that time. I did promise you one more thing about Brice, his other industrial company connections. He was connected to 4 gas companies, several banks, an insurance company, a Pacific Mail shipping company, an aqueduct in New York City, the Lima Car Works, as well as the Lima Gas Company. And again, learn more about those in the second article about him on our website. So these are just 3 of the lives I got to highlight in this year's newsletter articles. So make sure you go check out their compatriots who are also titans of industry in Allen County. Thank you so much. Anyone have questions for me? I look straight at her.
I wasn't aware of